You know, when we think about our mission, we can't help but think about the importance of what Jesus left us to do. And that's exactly what he did. He actually left us with the responsibility of carrying on the work that he started. And when we think about the weight of that, when we think about the responsibility that is on us, then we have to take that very seriously. And when we think about the lost, a lot of times we tend to forget about people who are around us every day, whether they're in our homes or in our workplace or schools or wherever we may go, that are away from Jesus, that don't know God. And for that very reason, tonight we're going to be reminded of the fact that that's something that we have to be is on mission. We have to be concentrating at all times of the fact that that's the purpose for which Jesus left us to follow in his steps, that we might continue to bring others to the kingdom, bring others to Jesus. And we lose sight of that so many times. And so, like we said, every lesson had the intent of bringing us closer to God and getting us maybe back on track if we had gotten off track in service to God. And it's just simple things that a lot of times we let slip on by because we get too busy or our lives with even good things get too hectic. And so again, we got to reorder our priorities, back to doing the first things first. And so this is one of those subjects that I can't help but leave you with tonight. And again, I leave that with myself as well. Because a lot of times when we think about preachers, we think about the fact that a lot of us maybe always are Bible studying with people, having Bible studies, and always baptizing folks and all that. But to be honest with you, we fall short in this area as well. And I'll confess to you that I need to do better when it comes to reaching the lost, because there are so many times I don't take the opportunities that are in front of me to talk to others about Jesus. And it's just because we just don't think about it. We just don't pay attention to what our mission is. And so I hope that tonight we'll be encouraged to get back on track when it comes to our mission. You may have heard about the life-saving station that they had on this seacoast town where a lot of shipwrecks occurred. A lot of ships would come in and they would hit those rocks. And a lot of times they would have to take their one little boat out there in the ocean and save those folks from the shipwreck. And they had a modest little operation there. They had a little hut that they worked out of. And any time a ship had an accident, they would go out and save all the people and bring them back to shore. And they'd operate out of that hut to try to get them back on their feet again or heal up anybody who was sick or hurting. And this they did for years. And they would risk their lives to do this. And so a lot of the community got interested in that. And so they started putting more money into it. And they bought more boats. And they had more people that could help when a shipwreck so that they could go out and save more people. And so they did this to the point where they got to realize, hey, we're operating out of this hut. We need a bigger place. And so they added on to the building. And it made it very nice for them to facilitate helping people. And they did this for a while. But eventually, they got to gathering there so much that they just enjoyed being together all the time. And at one point, they suggested, because we really want to be together and we really don't want to have to be interrupted by these emergencies, let's hire us some guys that will go out and save these people. And so they hired these men that would get in the boat and go out there and do that. And they did this for a time. But one night, there was a big shipwreck. And all of a sudden, they brought these guys in, and some of them were sick, and some of them were dirty, and some of them were just in bad shape. And they had made everything so nice in this rescue place that now they didn't want them coming in. And it was chaos because these men are wet and dirty and injured and all that. And so immediately they moved to make sure that they put a shower building outside so that when shipwrecked men came in, they could shower and clean up before they came in to the main building there. And so this they did for a while, and eventually they suggested that rescuing people was really getting in the way of the social activities that they had planned there. And so they put it to a vote among the members of this group and said, should we rescue people any longer? I believe that we shouldn't, was one of the suggestions. And so they put it to a vote, and the majority said we would rather just meet here and not to be bothered by rescuing the people that have been shipwrecked. Well, there was a small group that said, no, that's why we're here. And so they were voted out. And so they went down the beach a little ways. They built them a new place. They started rescuing people. But over time, it eventually happened again that they made a nice building and they had a nice place there to socialize. And before you know it, they were doing the same thing that this other group had. And today, if you go to that seacoast town, you'll find a lot of buildings that line the beach there that are all social clubs, but nobody saves those who are shipwrecked anymore. And the majority of the people now that have shipwrecks in that area drowned. Now that is one of those illustrations that helps us to see what the church can become if we are not constantly thinking about our mission. You know, you look at that little hut that was all about saving people from the shipwreck, saving them from the danger. But now they had gotten so inward in their focus, and they got to enjoy being together so much that they forgot about the people out there. Matter of fact, they got to the point where they didn't want to be inconvenienced anymore by having to go out there and make the effort to save those people who had been shipwrecked. And so, as we think about this lesson tonight, let's realize that, folks, we've got a mission, and it's about saving souls. And that's what Jesus told his disciples before he ascended back to heaven. And folks, that's what he tells us when we read the scriptures, that that's our job, that we are to reach out to those who are lost, and we must be about the mission that he has given us. And that's why we exist as a church, and we can lose sight of that. And so tonight, just 2 quick points about the fact that the lost need finding. First of all, let's realize that as we look into God's Word, we see the fact that everyone is lost without Jesus. When we think about that, we understand the fact that those who are away from Jesus are lost, but again, we struggle seeing that people are lost. If we're honest, when we go to work or when we go to a ball game in particular, that's where it hits me a lot of times. If I'm at a football stadium where there's 100,000 people packed in there, does it ever cross your mind as you look among the masses of people that the majority of these people are lost and on their way to hell? You know, we don't like to think about that at a ball game. We'd rather focus on the team and the fun we're there to have and to enjoy. But yet at the same time, if we're going to be honest, we really need to look and see the fact that there are those around us at all times that need finding, that are lost. And without Jesus, they're always going to be lost. And so we need to realize that. And if we really realize that, we would be more urgent with our mission. Because people die every day, folks, without Jesus. And we don't even think about it. When you hear the obituaries read in this area on the radio program here, do you ever think about the fact that people die every day, and yet have we done our job to make sure that they know about Jesus? And so we struggle to see people as lost, but we, again, see in the Bible that that's exactly what the case is. In Romans chapter 3, in verse 23, it tells us that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So we all know the fact that we're all sinners in need of salvation. And we find that in Romans chapter 3, verses 9 through 12, there it tells us that when we think about our condition, a lot of times we think we're pretty good people. But here he tells us there's none righteous, no, not one. All of us have sinned and fallen short of God's glory. All of us have gone astray, have fallen short, have not done what we should do. And so it's a reminder of the fact that every one of us, even the best person who's ever lived, still can't be saved without Jesus. And that's the purpose that he came. Luke chapter 19 and verse 10. There he says, "For I have come to seek and to save that which is lost." And so again, the mission is there before us that Jesus was focused on, that he came for that purpose, to seek and to save the lost. And then Matthew 1:21, even at his birth, it was said that he shall save his people from their sins. Now, when you look at all that, you have to think, well, here it is outlined for us that there are actually people who are lost because that's why Jesus came. That's why he was born into this world. And so it moves us to the next point to say that when you think about lost things or lost people, it's to say that they have great value. Because something that is lost many times is worth finding. We want to make sure that something that's valuable is found, right? And so that's why we tend to look everywhere trying to find that lost thing. Or we have a lost child that sometimes happens in our community. And everybody gets out and they try to find the lost child. Why? Because they're valuable. You know, you think about it. If you had several children and you had one that was lost, would you say, well, I've already got several kids, one ain't going to hurt? And we all know the fact that we would go after that one, right? Depending on which one it is, right? No, I'm just kidding. When we think about it, it's something that we would do because of the value of that person or that item that we're trying to find. So to say something is lost is to say it has great value. It's worth finding. And so that's what Jesus is saying about His creation, about humanity, is that everyone has been made, listen, in the image of God. And because we're all made in the image of God, we have great value to God. And for that reason, that sin has separated us from our God, that's where we need Jesus, to reconcile us back to God, to bring us back together. And that was done through the work of Jesus on the cross. When you look at 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, it tells us about the heart of God when it comes to those who are lost. I've always looked at this, and we quote it a lot of times, so I want you to hear the heart of God in this one verse. The Lord is not slack concerning His promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us. Now listen to this. Not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. You know, so many times I think that we think, well, God wants, people who would be Christians to be saved, but He doesn't really care about the ones who reject Him. But the truth of the matter is, the heart of God is that not anyone should perish, but that all, that's everybody, all would come to repentance. And so when you look at the heart of God about those who are lost, He wants everybody to be saved. He would love for there to be 100% response to His will being presented to them. But unfortunately, we also read in here that not everybody is going to obey the gospel. Not everybody is going to choose that route that they ought to go. In class this morning, we talked about the fact that if you could open up a window to heaven and open up a window to hell and just bring everybody in a single file line through and allow them to look into heaven and look into hell and ask them, where do you want to go? What would they do? Every one of them, if they had any sense, would say, well, I want to go to heaven. Every one of us in here want to go to heaven, right? And we don't even have to look through the other window into hell to realize we don't want to go there. But let's say we have some folks that are on the fence that hadn't decided. Well, once they looked into hell and saw how terrible that place is versus how wonderful heaven is, and by the way, the main difference of that is who is there and who is not there. You know, we ought to want to go to heaven not because of the streets of gold and not because of the benefits of no more sickness, no more pain, no more tears. We ought to want to go to heaven, folks, because that's where God is. And we want to be in His presence. He is the one whom all good flows from. And so to be in His presence is to be in heaven. And that's why hell is so terrible, because it is separation from God, the source of all that's good. It's not the flames and it's not Satan himself that makes hell terrible. It's the fact that it's without God and His presence and His goodness. And so, if you were able to do that, you would have no doubt 100% of the folks that would say, I want to go to heaven. And nobody would say, I want to go to hell. But yet we choose, and God leaves it up to all of us to choose which path we're going to take. And unfortunately, many will hear the gospel, and yet, because of selfishness or because of wanting control of their own lives, they'll reject Him. And let me go ahead and tell you this. When it comes to our mission, it is not our job to baptize people. It's not our job to convert people necessarily. It's our job to present to them the gospel. And at that point, it's their choice. You know, Romans 1 and verse 16 tells us that the power of God unto salvation is in the gospel. It's not in us. It's not at how well you present it. And it's not how eloquent a speaker you are. It's not in what your Bible knowledge is and answering questions. Folks, the power to save man is right here. And it's not in us. We can go about it the most feeble way possible, and yet souls can be saved. And what that does for me is it takes the pressure off of me to think that I've got to know everything and do everything just right when I'm trying to bring somebody to Jesus. It tells me that this is where the power is. I'm just a seed sower. I'm the one putting it out there, and it's up to the good ground of their heart to produce or not to. And so I hope that helps you when we talk about mission. It's not about you and your ability. It's about just giving them what you received so that they can have what you had the opportunity to do, and that's to become a Christian. And so that's why we see the heart of God here in 2 Peter 3 and verse 9, that He wants everybody to be saved. And 1 Timothy 1:15 says essentially the same thing, that Christ Jesus came here to save sinners, of whom Paul says, I am chief. And so that's the purpose of us being here, is the fact that we are to save souls. Now, when we look to Luke chapter 15, and that's our main text that we'll be kind of going back and forth to, you remember the three parables that Jesus tells there. He talks about some lost things. He talks about a lost sheep in the first section, right? The second part, he talks about lost coin. In the third place, he talks about lost son, or sons, if you want to look at it that way. And so all those three parables are talking about the value of lost things or people. And he presents it to us and reminds us that everybody doesn't get lost in the same way. If you think about the parables, first of all, he tells us that we can wander away from God, just like that one sheep does. You know, he goes away. He didn't mean to get lost. He just kind of got focused on the eating and got further and further away. And next thing you know, he's far away from the flock. And so some wander away. We know people in our lives that wander away from God. And then secondly, some are lost because of the carelessness of others. You know, there are times where parents don't tell their children about Jesus, or maybe it's through some work of offense that they turn people away from God by example or even by word or deed. You know, there are times where there are those who are lost because of others. And of course, they're ultimately responsible for their own souls, but at some point in time, somebody influenced them away from God rather than toward Him. So some would do that, and that's what you find with the parable of the lost coin. Carelessness ended up having the coin lost. Then the third place, you see that some are rebellious. They're lost because they go against what their father has said. They go against what they know is right. And that's what you have with what we call the prodigal son. He's rebellious. He wants his inheritance now. He doesn't want to wait on dad to live his life and die and get his inheritance. He wants to live it up right now. And so there he goes into the far country. And so here, rebelliousness against God or against his father, and God being the one in the parable that it points to, tells us that we can be rebellious against what God has taught us. And by the way, we can also be self-righteous like the other son was. And you can be lost at home just as well as you can be lost in the far country. You can be lost sitting in a pew every Sunday if you're not connected to God, if you're not here for the right reason. And so for that reason, we see here that people don't get lost the same way. But the good news is the fact that there's only one way to get found, and that's through Jesus. In the book of Acts, it tells us in Acts 4 and verse 12 that there is only one name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. And we know that name is Jesus. And then Jesus says in John 14 and verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And so there again, Jesus says, this is the only way home. This is the only way to be found, is to come through me. Now, that's not very popular these days. There are a lot of people that would debate you on that and say, oh, there are many paths to go to heaven. But you can't go to heaven without Jesus. And so, first of all, everyone is lost without Jesus. There's no doubt about it. Because the Bible tells us very plainly, if they don't have a relationship with Him, if they have not obeyed the gospel that He died for, there's no hope for them. And it's sad. And listen, Instead of being people that, in a sense, tell people what they need to know as far as the truth, and once we tell them, we kind of put our hands up and say, okay, we've done our job, and we're not sad when people are rejecting God. We're not sad when He's being disobeyed or when people don't become Christians. Let's look at people who are lost with a tear in our eye. Let's think about the fact that we're not happy that anybody's lost. Again, going back to the heart of God, if we're going to have the heart of God, we're going to feel the way God does about the lost. And it makes God sad that there are people out there who are lost. That's His creation. That's those souls that He made, He created to honor Him, and yet they have not chosen to do so. And so we ought to feel that way. Instead of getting people told or to win an argument or a debate, listen, you're going to love people into the church before you debate people into the church. And that's something that we always have to keep in mind. And so let's make sure that we have that attitude as we reach the lost. But secondly, everyone is lost without Jesus, but we also need to realize that every Christian is to find the lost. It's not just the elder's job or the preacher's job. It's not like the story that we just began with, talking about the guys who were rescuing those who were shipwrecked. Eventually, they finally got tired of doing that because they were so busy among themselves that they hired other people to do it. And so many times we kind of have that attitude. Well, that's why we hire you guys, you preachers, because y'all are supposed to do our evangelizing for us. It would be nice if we could hire away our responsibility, wouldn't it? We might raise enough money to do that. But at the same time, the Bible is very clear in telling us that it's everybody's job. Not just those who preach, not just Bible class teachers, not just the leaders of a church. It's everybody's responsibility. And that's what we really need to see, because we all struggle not only to see people as lost, but we also struggle to see our responsibility in reaching those who are lost. A lot of times we forget that that's our job. Now some would say, well, wait a minute, preacher, that's just not my talent. That's not my thing. You know, I can work around the building, or I can fix a meal, or I can send a card. But when you get into Bible study, I don't know my Bible that well, and that's just not my thing. And we can legitimately say that maybe that's not the strongest attribute that we have. It may not be our talent that automatically comes our way. But I've told you in past lessons about one of the best evangelists we have at Stony Point. Raymond will go and invite people to a Bible study on a Monday night or whenever we can get together. And I can tell you, Raymond can't answer hardly any questions about the Bible. He just has limited ability in that area. But Raymond can sure enough get out there and try to influence people to come to worship, to come and study the Bible. And I'll tell you, we have baptized probably no less than 20 people here in the last 5 years because of what Raymond has done. You don't have to be talented. You don't have to be, special in your knowledge or your ability. It's just the fact that you are making the effort to do so. And again, Paul says, I planted and Apollos watered, and God gave the increase. It's ultimately up to God to do His work when it comes to His Word. All we are the ones doing is trying to present the message to them. That's all we're supposed to do. And so you don't have to have all these talents and abilities to do that. Any of us can do it. And you may find different ways to do it. There's not just one way to try to bring others to Jesus. And let me just say this as well. It doesn't have to be a sit-down Bible study to bring others to Jesus. So many times we think that it has to be Joe Miller film strips in several meetings, or it has to be an open Bible on a table when you're sitting across from somebody. There are people who are converted on the golf course just through conversations. There are people who are converted in fishing boats. While they're fishing, they're talking about what really matters in the future. And everybody is concerned about whether or not they're going to heaven or hell, whether they want to admit it or not. You get into a spiritual conversation with people, and it'll flow wherever it needs to go. Now, at some point, obviously, they need to know what the Scriptures say, and hopefully we can either hand them something that may guide them, a tract or a piece of paper that has a gospel plan on it. I noticed you have these little cards in your foyer that have the plan of salvation on those. People can be guided, and they can look at it themselves, but it doesn't always have to be a formal sit-down Bible study, and that's what I want you to notice tonight. It doesn't have to be that way. We can be evangelistic in a lot of different ways. So Jesus has given every Christian this mission of reaching the lost. And we see that in Matthew chapter 28, 18 through 20, where he says, "Go into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." He tells all of us to go. He says that in Mark's account, in Mark 16:15. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. The failure we have, folks, is the going. We ask everybody to come to us. And Jesus says, no, I want you to go to them. And that's okay to invite people here, because that's part of going, is going out there and inviting them here. But at the same time, let's not think it all happens here. A lot of evangelism is going to happen out there, wherever you are with these folks, because that's where they trust you. You have relationships in your neighborhood. You have relationships at work. And those folks are the ones that you need to start with, because you already have that connection with them. Think about it. Do you hear much from a stranger and really trust what they have to say? I mean, if somebody comes and knocks on my door and I open the door and it's somebody I've never met before and he starts telling me all this information, I'm going to be a skeptic. I'm going to go, well, I don't know if I believe you or not, whatever the subject is. But if there's somebody who's been my friend for 20 years and they come and talk to me, I'm going to believe them and I'm going to listen to them. I may not be happy about what they're saying. I may even reject what they're saying, but I appreciate the fact that they care enough for me that they're going to talk to me about it. And that's the whole point, is all we have to do is care enough to talk to people who are lost. If you really love them, you'll talk to them. There's a preacher that I like to listen to on the internet, and he talks about when he first heard the gospel. And he said he was playing football at his local high school, and there was a Christian guy on the team. And he came in the locker room one day after a ball game, and he looked at him. He said, "Hey, Matt." He said, "Yeah." He said, "I need to tell you about Jesus. When do you want to do that?" And this guy goes, "I don't know. How about tomorrow?" He said, "Okay." And that's the way he went about it. He just said, "Hey, I need to tell you about Jesus. When do you want to do that?" And that may not be your approach. But this guy is now a preacher because one of his classmates, one of his teammates on the football team, took the time in the locker room not to say, "What a great practice we had," or "What a great game," and "How great you did on the field." He came and just said, "Hey, I need to talk to you about Jesus. When do you want to do that?" That's just it. We have to find some way to get the message out, some way to break the ice and start that spiritual conversation. And so that's part of it, is reaching those who've never known Jesus. In James 5 and verse 20, it tells us kind of the secondary evangelistic responsibility we have is that those who wander away from God and are brought back, we save a soul from death and hide a multitude of sins. And he tells us there, if a brother wanders from the truth, there are lost people who used to be members here. Let me encourage you. We did this at Florence Boulevard Church many years ago. We made a list of those who were no longer active among our people. And some of them we didn't know if they'd gone to other churches or what. And so we start making that list, and it's 2 or 3 pages long over all these years. We go back through church directories and we're reminded of people we have forgotten about. We make this long list and we start contacting them. We call them up and we want to find out where they are and how they're doing spiritually. And some of them were faithful in service to God and attending another congregation, but we found a bunch that weren't going anywhere to worship and they weren't serving God anymore. And through praying for them and through contacting them, I bet we had 30 or more people come back to the Lord during that campaign that we called, Restoring the Hearing. We wanted to make sure that we tried to do our best to do what James 5 and verse 20 said as well. Not only those who had never obeyed the gospel, but those who had as well. But here we look at this mission that he's given all of us. And by the way, in Acts chapter 8, it wasn't just the apostles who preached the gospel. It says those who were scattered went everywhere. That was your everyday Christians who went everywhere teaching the gospel to others. And that's what our responsibility is. And I want us to see that. This will get you a little bit too. I ran across, and I don't know if I'm gonna lose some man points here. So let me prepare myself. I may have seen this on Pinterest. Okay. I know that was rough, wasn't it? All right. So I'm going through my phone and I've got Pinterest on there. It's got a lot of manly things on there too, by the way. Okay. And so I'm looking at it and there's this one quote that pops up on my phone and I look at it and it was huge when it came to the way that I looked at Luke chapter 15. We just talked about the lost sheep parable that Jesus tells. And many of us would look at that parable and say, what man having 100 sheep would not just count those 99 as a pretty good deal? Why would he even worry about that one? I mean, he's got 99. I mean, how many of us would love a 99 on a test when we were in school, right? We wouldn't sweat that 1 point we didn't have. And a lot of times if we lose a penny or something like that, we don't even have, the energy to bend over and pick it up a lot of times. We'll just keep on going. So a lot of times what we do when we look at Luke 15 and this parable of the sheep being lost, we tend to say, why would he do that? Why would he leave 99 and go after that one? And this quote that I saw on Pinterest or on my phone one day said, when it comes to this matter of the idea of leaving the 99 to find the one, it seems irrational and senseless until that one is you. And that hit me pretty hard because I thought I was that sheep at one point, and you were too. And think about the fact that if somebody, whether it was your parents or a neighbor or whoever it was that helped you know about Jesus, if they didn't care enough about you to come after you, then you would be that one. And we want to make sure that there's not one that we leave without the knowledge of Jesus. We want to make sure we give everybody the same opportunity. And so when you do what Jesus says, you will find out what heaven already knows from Luke chapter 15. If we read the whole chapter tonight, you would see the fact that several times in that chapter it says there's more joy among the angels over one sinner that repents, over 99 just persons that need no repentance. There's joy in the presence of God over one sinner that repents. That theme is all the way through there. And then ultimately, when the father runs to greet that son who's coming home, it shows you how important it is to God and to heaven when a sinner comes to their senses and takes care of that sin problem by turning to God. And what happens, listen folks, when it comes to evangelism, when it comes to our part, when we have a part in helping someone become a Christian, you're talking about a great feeling that you can't beat with any other thing out here in this world. I mean, there is something within us that when we have a part in bringing somebody to Jesus, it just makes us want to do it again. Who else can we find? Who else can we try to reach out to? And what that does is it just gives us more and more energy to be evangelistic just because of that first one that we help find Jesus. And we may have only just done the invitation. Come to a gospel meeting or come to worship with me on Sunday. And somebody may have taken it from there. But at the same time, there is great joy in heaven and there's great joy in the Christian when you have a part in seeing somebody become a Christian. And the main reason is because you have just changed their eternal destiny. That's forever, folks. You can change somebody's life for a few years, but the power and ability that God has partnered with us in reaching those who are lost, that's amazing that we have part in that. And by the way, that's exactly what God has always done, is He's always used human hands and feet to reach those who are lost. Think about when Jesus was here. Did He baptize folks? Jesus didn't baptize them. His disciples baptized them. And by the way, when it came to Paul being converted on the road to Damascus, or that process that started on the road to Damascus, you know, Jesus could have very easily from heaven told Paul right there, what he needed to do to become a Christian. But what did he do? He sent him into town, and he sent Ananias over there to tell Paul what he needed to do. Now, Jesus could have done it, but why did he bring Ananias along? Ananias was scared to death about going over there. He wasn't a willing participant. But at the same time, God has always used us to reach those who are lost. And I want you to see the fact that he wants to use you as well. Well, as we conclude, I want to tell you something that I've never told anybody else. I know you're going to be shocked about this. I've just saved it for you guys. I'm far enough away from home that I feel like I can tell this without it being a problem. Raymond, this friend of mine at church, that he brings people to Bible studies. We were having Monday night Bible studies, and we just had it open. You want to bring anybody, you bring them. We'll study the Bible with them every Monday night. Raymond finds this married couple that he went to school with years ago. For a lack of a better term, they were just rough people. Came in, and you could tell that both of them had lived a hard life, and they were reluctant even about being in a church building. And we were sitting in the library at the table, and we began to study the Bible together, and I couldn't tell whether it was clicking with them or not. She was a lot more receptive, it seemed, than he was. And we met for about 3 weeks in a row. And Raymond, he forgets to tell me stuff every now and then. And after the second meeting, he said, "Oh, I didn't tell you this. This fella that we're studying with, he said he killed a guy a few years ago." I said, "Oh, that's nice to know since we're meeting up here by ourselves on Monday night. Thank you." And so he tells me that. And, it's a shock anytime you hear that, right? Because how many of us know people? Not too many people know somebody that's killed somebody. And he told me the story. He said this guy was slipping in and cheating on him with his wife. And he came home and he found this man in bed with his wife. And he shot him and killed him. And, of course, went to the court system. And for whatever reason, they didn't convict him of murder. And they allowed him to go free. And so I hear this story. And all of a sudden, this is what I haven't told anybody. I remember that we have a member at church whose dad was killed by another man because her dad was stepping out on her mom, and he was shot at this lady's house that he was cheating on her mom with. And the young lady who had been a member there for many years said, "I don't even know who this man is. I think I know his name, first name, but I've never run into him, and I don't know if I ever will." You ever had that hot feeling just come all over your body like, wait a minute, this guy I think is the same guy that she's talking about. And now we take him to the baptistry, he and his wife, and we baptize them. And I tell you, first of all, I was a little afraid because I thought, well, what if he's sitting over here and she's sitting over here and somehow or another they figure it out? God takes care of stuff like that. He came for the first few weeks after he was baptized, I think 2 weeks. And he said, "We're going to go to this church closer to our house." It was another church of Christ close to their house that was smaller. He said, "We're not about big crowds, and y'all got too many people here for our comfort. So if that's okay, we'll go over here." And to this day, they're still faithful to God. But I got in my car that night after I'd put two and two together. And I just happened to turn on my car, and the song that was on the radio, I listened to Christian radio, and the song was, "God, you are so overwhelming." And I just started crying. I thought, you're absolutely right. For me to help this guy who had, had part in killing somebody, now to be forgiven of those things, even though he might not have been convicted in our court system, he was still going to be convicted by God unless he was forgiven of that. And I wanted to tell this person, but I knew that might be more hurtful than helpful. And so it's a secret that I just kind of keep, that I know that the person who killed her dad is now a Christian. And I feel like God allowed us to be a part of that. And it's thrilling for me to know that somehow or another that God is at work. Do you believe that God will put people in your path that you can study with? We need to realize that He will. And so tonight, the last verse, Joshua chapter 3 and verse 13. This is where it comes to you. It's time for a decision. Joshua chapter 3 has absolutely nothing to do with the gospel, but it does have something to do with taking that first step. You see, the priests were told as they bore that ark that as soon as their feet stepped into that river, then the river would part and they would walk across on dry land, right? Remember that when Joshua was about to lead them into the promised land? But listen, that river was flowing over its banks, and it was not until those priests took that first step that God's promises came about. And folks, we've got to decide tonight, are we going to take that first step? Are we going to make that move toward being obedient in teaching others the gospel? You're thinking of somebody right now that knows that you know that needs to hear about Jesus. And I want to challenge you as we leave here tonight, at some point this week, contact them, call them, send them a text, send them a note. Do something to start that process so that they can know about Jesus, just like we're honored to know about Him as well. And so tonight, if you don't know Jesus, we'd love to talk with you about becoming a Christian and obeying what the Bible says about what it takes to be born again, to be a child of God, to have that forgiveness. Or it may be that you're just simply wanting to get back on track and be closer to God. But if we can help you in any way, we ask that you come right now as we stand and sing.